Look, Brian Czach is over there. He's about to come and sit down and explain to you what this guy is doing sitting here. Hey, Brian. Hi.
Ooh.
Good,
Hey, how's it going?
good to see you. Yeah.
It's good to be seen.
What a great place you got here.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. Welcome here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You going to tell him who I am?
Yes. Oh, yes. Of course.
Okay.
Well, this is Andy Peake, none other than.
Right. Yeah. A good friend ever since Brian moved to Nashville here.
Yes.
Yes, we've
Well,
shared plenty of laughs already and a lot of information, and I've really enjoyed coming to see Brian do what he does in a number of situations, which are
well,
about as versatile and yet pop world friendly as you can get. So
I
it's
appreciate that.
a great space you got here.
Thank you. Yes. Well, welcome. I call this Nighthawk Studio.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as long as it's a not Night Hawk Tour studio.
Oh, no. Let's not go there.
Okay, all right, okay.
Oh, gosh.
But this is a great facility. You guys can't really tell what all went into this place. And Brian gave me a kind of a run through of all the gear he's got here and how he built the studio. And a lot of care went into it. And if you look around the room, you realize how much how savvy he is about what he's doing here. Very impressive and really cool. And he's just a class act, so I got to say. So
Oh, well, that is too kind. Thank you.
underscored what I was supposed was the case to begin with. So, yeah. Anyway, it's great to be here.
Well, thanks for coming over, and I'm so glad to be doing this interview with you, if we want to call it an interview or just let's just call it a hangout session, like
Okay, that's great.
hanging out with microphones.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of microphones.
We do have, a surplus of them.
That's okay. That's great. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, so I haven't mentioned it yet, but you are a drummer, you are a songwriter, you're a singer. How did we meet? What do you remember when we met?
I do. I remember it was at a place that is now called the Local, I think.
Yes.
In Nashville, and it was a blues jam that was hosted by a lady named Kara there.
Yes.
And
I missed that jam.
yeah,
It's not.
there was
They don't have that anymore.
lots of good times, and COVID kind of put the schnockers on that, but they still exist to some extent in different places. But had a lot of people that went through there. A lot of really good talent. She had featured artists every week and so forth, and then people would get up and sit in with different configurations of, it was like throw people together. Sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're not as good.
But they're learning, and that's how you learn.
That's exactly right.
Sometimes you sit in with people who are better than you, and hopefully you rise to that occasion.
Yeah.
That's how you gain experience, isn't it?
And people bring things to the table that you don't necessarily expect. Even if they don't have the experience that you have and so forth. Sometimes they might be a gear slut like I am, or any number of things that or they know somebody that I know, or they're a fan of the same music that I'm a fan of. So there's always a conversation to be had there.
Sure.
But anyway, there's like a porch area in the place.
Yes.
And I think I had already sat in, and I was standing outside listening. They had speakers out of the porch area, and whoever was playing on stage were playing out onto the patio. And I stopped who I was talking to about two verses into the song, and I said, wait a minute. Who's playing drums right now? Who is this guy?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Because everything was right. Everything that you were doing was right. The beats were right. The tempo was right. The fills were what really got me. They were really accurate and not sloppy at all, and they came out on the downbeat where they're supposed to come out.
What an idea. What a concept.
Right. Which is something that a lot of us either didn't get or it took us a while to get. That's something that's so important that you can, when you go into a fill, you know, these guys aren't playing the fill with you. You got to come out here where the next downbeat is. And you were right on it. And I remember walking up to you afterwards and saying, "Who are you?"
I do vaguely remember that moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I got a little bit of what your background was, but most of which I've forgotten. But I can.
Me too.
Yeah, that's something we're going to talk about. But yeah, I was so impressed, and I kind of watched, you know, for subsequent jams and so forth. And then I noticed that you were starting to get hired by people in town.
Well, and thanks to that jam, I mean, it was. I mean, not only was it a fun musical hang, but it was just a fun place to hang and just hang out with people and just, you know, meet people and just it was just a good hang overall.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with like, you know, this person is doing that musically or that person's not doing that or whatever. It was just all about like us coming together and having a few beers and just like some place to go on a Tuesday night when not much else was happening.
It was casual networking.
Yeah.
And fun.
It was fun, right? It was free parking. Wow.
Yeah.
Remember those days?
Yes. Not that long ago.
It wasn't, no.
But, yeah, and there, you know, there were a lot of good players that came and worked there, and including Kara's band was really good.
Yes.
She had some great people working with her all the time.
Yeah. And then she would feature a band after her band would play, and that was always fun because it was different every week.
Yep. Yeah, it was great. And so I got to know you a little bit there.
Yeah.
And then we kept crossing paths, and I would see you in things. And then I noticed you did this Miles Davis thing at Rudy's Jazz Room, and I thought, yeah, that doesn't really surprise me that much because I knew he had it in him, but I had not heard you in that situation before. One thing I did remember was that you weren't playing. You were as the great bass player Michael Rhodes used to say, you could chop wood. In other words, you could play 2 and 4, but you had note displacement and stuff that a lot of drummers don't ever get to.
Yeah.
And or to one degree or another, but it was stuff that obviously you had put time in to becoming who you are and as a drummer, and you know, you have this situation deservedly so because of the fact that you're a notch up, you know, from the guy just off the street.
Oh, shucks. Well, thank you once again.
It's true.
Yeah. I wish I would have had the chance to meet Michael Rhodes before he passed. Unfortunately, I've certainly heard him on records, and I've seen him perform in YouTube videos and whatnot. And, yeah, I never had the pleasure to meet the amazing talent that Michael Rhodes was.
I won't get too far off the track with this, but I'll tell you, I used to live in Colorado before I moved to Nashville in the late 80s, and I would go to the Telluride Bluegrass Festival, which there's a lot of bluegrass, but it's a lot of non-bluegrass too.
Okay.
And the guy that I would go and work there with had an after-hours jam every night after the main shows at the festival, and all the players would come and sit in, and it was the guys from Newgrass, John Cowan and Sam Bush and Bela Fleck, and Vince Gill would come and sit in.
Cool. Wow.
Michael Rhodes, of course. And that's where I met Michael Rhodes, and I got thrown in on the song that was like a super fast shuffle breakneck thing, and I said, I don't know. So we got through it, and he came over and introduced himself, and I said, thanks, I really appreciate it. You play so great with these guys, and so we buddied up a little bit, and then a few years later, I moved to Nashville.
Yeah, well, this is good because I wanted to ask you about how you got here, how you arrived.
Right, and there were a few people that I knew, and some of them were from Telluride, from the Telluride Bluegrass Festival.
Okay.
And Rhodes, I got a chance to start doing some things with him. I did this little pickup thing that was like some songwriter friend of mine who had moved from Colorado, and it was a guy named Sam Broussard, who's a great guitar player that now lives in Lafayette, Louisiana. Michael Rhodes on bass, Pete Wasner, the piano player who had played like with the Lowell George band, and Wasner wrote One More Last Chance, I think. But he co-wrote a bunch of stuff with Vince Gill. Wasser's a great player. And we just went in and we did like Little Feetish type of stuff all along. And playing with Rhodes was such an amazing thing at that point because it was like I'd never worked with anybody. And he's not fancy, and I've had a chance to play a little bit like Victor Wooten. But Rhodes was not like that. He was just a player.
Yeah.
But he had this ability to just lift you up and put you on his shoulders as a bass player.
I could imagine.
For a drummer,
yeah,
that's like I never have to even think twice about it. And he'll make a turn here that's just like, oh, I want to go see that scenery. And he was just a delight to work with, and he was a fun guy. And
he looks like a lot of fun. Like he's just, when I see him perform, he's like kind of moving all over the stage and just a ball of energy.
It was never any different from that too. He would come over to you, and you'd be playing, and you got up. I'll put my face in the camera, and you're sitting there playing the drums, and he would come in and look at you with his eyes wide open and just play bass, and you're going,
right.
Am I doing something wrong here?
Right.
But you realize after a while that's what he does.
He kind of reminds me. It's like I would call him the Will Lee of Nashville.
He's although he's got his own situation, but yes, there's some of that.
I see some similarities between the two of them.
And of course, he passed not too long ago, which was a shame.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I got to hang out with him some. Went to see, Leslie Nielsen movie with him, hang out, just do stuff.
Cool.
And
some laughs.
And he was a great guy, really sweet guy, and such a shame that he left, before his time. But, it was cool.
Yeah. Well, that's great that you got to hang out with him and get to know him and play with him and all that.
So that got me here. And
right. So, talk about so what was the impetus of you coming to Nashville? And
one of the guys in that band,
how did that transpire?
That Little Feetish band, Sam Broussard, had played, his claim to fame originally was there was an old pop song years ago called Wildfire that Michael Murphy recorded, and it was about a horse that came down from the Yellow Mountain and blah blah blah, and, in the prairie, and there was a guitar part that went da 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 at the beginning, and Sam played that part, and he became semi famous because of that hook that he'd put at the beginning of that song.
Okay.
And after he did it, he had moved to Colorado, where I met him and worked in a band. He subbed in a band I was in. We got to be friends. Everybody went their way, but he and another guy from Colorado moved down to Nashville, and they got hired by the pop artist Nicolette Larson, who had a career as a pop artist, and had a big hit called "It's Gonna Take a Lot of Love to Get You Through the Night." It was like you hear it in the grocery store still.
I think I've heard that song. Yeah,
you'd know it if you heard it. Anyway, she had a career, and she did some stuff like "Baby Don't Do It" that the band did, and she was kind of funky stuff, and she was part of that L.A. thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a couple of fairly good, well-received albums, but just wasn't enough to sustain her, so she got an opportunity to do a thing here with Steve Warner, released a single, made enough of an impact.
What year is this
about? This would have been late 80s, probably 86 or so.
Okay.
And so MCA decided to sign her to Nashville. She moved here. She got a management company here. Both Sam and Brian Grassmeyer, by the way, who lives just down the street from us here now, the bass player, got hired by Nicolette, and they called me up and said, we want to make a change in a drummer. I was still living in Colorado. I had just broken up with a girlfriend, and I thought, you know what, this may be my chance to go check something else out. So I moved down, took the gig, and she had a handful of things that were still, fairly cool things, doing some TV promoting stuff for MCA, and we did it like a Alaskan tour and so on and so forth. So it was a foot in the door to begin with.
Okay.
And I could go to people back in those days when they still kind of knew who Nicolette was and say, I play with Nicolette Larson. And I went, oh, okay. So
it gave you some street cred.
Like it or not.
Like it or not.
It did.
Yeah. Well, that's important, I think. Especially when you move to a new environment.
I see guys come in now, and I think, God, what a tough road this is for guys that don't have anything going on.
Yes.
You know,
Especially now when there's so many moving to town.
ain't that the truth? So many really good ones too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So let me ask you, when you got to Nashville and maybe you'd spent some time here after a few months or so, what was your take on Nashville? Did you like it here? I mean, were you happy? What was your overall sense of Nashville?
I loved Colorado.
Yeah.
It had a place in my heart for reasons I won't go into. But I had played in the ski areas and the bars in Boulder, you know, for the college kids
Okay.
for years and years.
Yep.
And I got here and I started meeting people, and I noticed that there were tour buses and that there were large rehearsal spaces.
The industry.
And in the industry, recording studios,
Mm-hmm.
management companies, and all this kind of stuff everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I'm going, I don't like the humidity here, but I do think this would be a good place for me to come. So I went ahead and moved here at the end of 1987.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And had you spent much time in, I guess this is called the South, right? We're in the South somewhat.
Some. I had lived. My dad was a preacher, and we lived in Dallas
Okay.
for a while, which is not exactly the South. It's a country.
Texas is its own thing. Yeah.
And I lived just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, for a while.
All right.
So
you weren't total stranger to the Southern ways and the culture here and the food and whatnot. Yeah.
I could say y'all without people.
Did you ever wear a cowboy hat?
Oh,
You did?
I actually.
I've never seen you wear a cowboy hat.
Well, that's an interesting story because my next gig after Nicolette, I heard that she had a tour that fell out. She didn't have enough support to keep the dates.
Okay.
So I went, I got to find another gig.
Right.
And I heard that Tanya Tucker was auditioning people. So I went and auditioned, and I was able to go to the band leader at the time and say, I've been working for Nicolette Larson. He said, okay, I'll write you down for audition.
Great.
So I went and did it, and it's a book in itself, to having worked with Tanya Tucker, who was a brilliant artist.
Uh-huh.
And good-hearted in many ways. You know, she. I can go on and on, but basically, you know, she was happy to have me there, and the band was good, and she was always on.
Uh-huh.
And she was a little, you know, up and down as far as her own personal habits and so forth. She struggled with some substance addiction all
There's a
early on.
documentary, I think, on her
Yes.
that was out just
Yeah.
recently.
We
Yeah.
just watched it recently, yeah.
Okay.
But it's
Yeah.
it's more about the Brandy Carlisle
Yes.
redoing her, reinventing her.
Yes.
And it's very good. We watched it,
Okay.
but for my birthday, Tanya Tucker gave me a cowboy hat.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's in the closet, and
Very good.
yeah. So, but yeah. So anyway, that was that, and I worked for Tanya for a while, and I realized that was life-threatening, and
Okay. Should I ask? I don't know.
let me just say she had just gone through some changes, and her dad completely wiped out everybody except for one guy who was the band leader. Okay, and we didn't have a her brother was her road manager, and he was not really up to the task.
Okay.
But he did it anyway, and we had no sound people touring with us. We had no monitor guy. We had no front of house guy, and her brother, who was the road manager, had been a bus driver before that, and still found that he kind of wanted to do that. And at times when he would do that, we would all go, you know, are we going to get there safely? So before too long, I went, I got to do something else. So I jumped around. I worked with a girl named Becky. I left.
Mm-hmm.
Worked with a girl named Becky Hobbs for a while, who was wonderful to work with.
Okay.
And then I did a gig at the Bluebird Cafe because I played drums and percussion with a girl named Susie Boggess. And Susie is still around, and she did she did some kind of folky stuff, so I would set up the drum set and I'd have a conga or congas next to me, so I could, hybrid, play the bass drum and play the congas at the same time.
Smart.
And the bass player on the gig was a guy named Dave Pomeroy.
There we go. I know who.
Right.
Dave.
And Dave had worked with the country artist Don Williams for years.
Yes.
And he told me that they had made a change and Don needed a drummer.
Okay.
And would I be interested in doing it? So I got to audition for it with just like only one other person and got hired for that. So I worked all of 1989 with Don Williams.
Nice.
And
was that a lot of touring?
it was some. It was like 50 or 60 dates a year.
Okay.
And it was great. It was really an education because the guitar player in the band had played on "Oh Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison, and the keyboard player had done all the string arrangements for Crystal Gale, and of course Dave Pomeroy, who is now the president of the union in Nashville.
Yeah, and doing good things for us.
And Russ Paul,
fighting the good fight.
Yes, he is. He is. Yeah, he's terrific.
Yes.
Russ Paul is a steel player on it, and he's done a lot of great things, recently. So it was an all-star band, and they were all very knowledgeable. And I had to learn a lot, and I was coming from this rock and roll, Little Feat, Bad Company, pop rock background, and here are all these guys that had played with George Jones and
the traditional country thing. Yes,
and it really
that is a change of gears.
It is a change of gears, and I didn't have the background in that. My parents were from the Midwest, but we didn't really listen to much country music in my house when I was a kid.
I can certainly.
You
know
what
that
might be.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes, yeah.
So I jumped into that.
Talk about let's see, when you moved here and when you started doing this touring and working with these artists, at what point did you learn the Nashville number system, and how did that sort of come into your playing, if you will? Like,
I'll preface it by saying,
did you like it? Did you like the Nashville number system?
It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
For the most part, I've come to like it.
You read regular notation too.
I did. I do, and I did. I was a music major for a couple of years in college, although I left before I graduated.
Okay.
But I did take 4 semesters of theory and sight singing and all that kind of stuff.
Great.
So
I think that's really important when being introduced to the Nashville number system. I think having a good theory background really takes you a long way.
It does. And on top of that, I'll go even back further. My mom was a church organist and pianist. And we had all kinds of music. We had Broadway, we had Ahmed Jamal, we had Ray Charles, we had the Beatles, we had all these different things in our household.
Yes.
And she sat down with me one day at the piano and said, "Let me show you something here." And she went up a C scale on the piano.
Yes.
Da 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 da. Major scale. And,
yes.
She said, this is the first note. This is the second note. This is the third note in the major scale.
It's your first theory lesson.
My first theory lesson and my first number system.
Yes.
Lesson.
Basically.
Because at that point, you're looking at a number chart that says 1 4 1 4. Okay, your bass chord is based on that degree of the scale.
Exactly.
And so I understood the concept right away.
Yeah.
What I had to get used to was the nomenclature that everybody that varies. As you know,
yes,
you've been in situations where somebody handed you a chart and you went, I'm not 100% sure what this means here.
Yeah.
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 But
because that's true. There's no real standard for it.
No, close.
There's for some things, but other things it's a little more signature.
A lot of variation.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah.
So
I like to ask that question because for me, I had heard of the Nashville number system prior to moving here to Nashville, but never really knew what it was, never really gave it much thought. And if anything, having gone through music school like I did, it was scoffed at in a lot of circles, So when I finally moved here and I said to myself,
Yep.
It's time to learn the Nashville number system. So I'm not the only guy in the room who doesn't know how to read one of these charts.
Yep.
And I learned within about a week.
Yep.
And I was like, where has this been my whole entire life? Because, boy, I sure could have used it up until now, Yeah.
And, and the main difference is, I went to a soundtrack recording at Universal Studios one time with a friend of mine who was a drummer, and it was like a TV show, and it was him on drums, a guy named Willie Ornelas, and the bass player was Leland Sklar.
Oh.
And as you went down the list, it was all heavy hitter Los Angeles guys.
All right.
And when I got there, they handed these charts out to these guys, and they went, blah, 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 okay, boom, And I'm going, oh my God, these guys read that well, and they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was very specific. Okay, and that's the point I'm going to get to, because when you get a Nashville numbers chart, all you've got is a block.
That's right.
It's
a number. It's a major or minor.
It's a frame.
Right.
Right. And you decide what drywall to put in and what to put on the wall.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Having just spent a bunch of time talking about your studio here.
Well, it's highly interpretive.
Yep.
And I think maybe that's what I like the most about it.
Right.
Because it's up to you to create the magic.
You get to play to your strengths when that's the situation.
I agree. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, because so often you get something, especially on the drum kit, where you get drum set notation and you're like, good Lord, what is this? I'm not going to play that. What were you thinking?
Right. And at that point, you either say, you called the wrong guy for this, or I'll do the best I can with it, or why don't you just let me give it a shot and put in here what I think should be in it.
Yeah.
So you've got those three and maybe a few other variations.
Mm-hmm.
But Nashville, as you said, is great for that. That's why you said, what's the deal? It's a mixed bag, because there's a lot of times that you've got things that happen in the other people's part of the music that aren't notated. They're not good at being able to write rhythms in Nashville.
That's true.
The guys, that came out of the hills of Kentucky, they know what the degrees of the scale are and how to count to 4.
Sure. But then again, they're not writing Tower of Power charts either.
No. But,
so
if you get a pattern that's, for instance, da 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 da,
that's hard to notate in a Nashville numbers.
Guys don't know how to notate.
That's right.
So
right.
So it's valuable to have that in your background.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, you couldn't agree more with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like I said, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. Yeah, for some things it works great, and other things less so.
Yeah.
And that certainly is. Yeah.
Now, where did you go to college?
I went to Ithaca College School of Music up in upstate New York.
Yeah, somebody knew what they were doing up there, I'll tell you that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a great school. I studied with Gordon Stout, world-renowned marimba player.
Okay.
He's retired now, but I think he's doing a thing up in Pasek coming up this fall.
Is that
so.
right?
Yeah, he's still performing and putting on clinics and what have you.
I'll talk to you about that after the interview.
Okay, all right.
Got a connection at Pasek.
I wanted to go this year. I was planning on going, and as it turns out, I got hired to do some touring after all. So every year I've missed it, just because I'm never around.
He had it in Nashville one time.
Oh, wow.
Years and years ago. But I got to sit front row and watch Vinny.
Oh my goodness!
Oh,
that's just a dream come true. I mean,
it was a mixed bag. It was a dream and a nightmare.
Oh, sure, okay, well, I feel that too. Right, went home and cry yourself to sleep.
What did he just do?
Right. What am I doing with these sticks? Put these down.
Right. Well, you're a lot closer to that than
I am. None of us are even remotely close to him. Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, So Pasek. So you and you studied primarily with that person. What was his name?
Gordon Stout.
Okay.
I mean, I studied marimba with him and various other ensembles that we were part of, percussion ensemble, and of course I went through the ranks with the symphonic orchestra and the concert band, and played in the jazz band and all that. So my lessons were focused mainly on classical percussion quite a bit, as far as scholastic,
Yeah.
boxes to check
Sure.
off.
Yep.
But through and through, I'm a drum set player from the beginning to the end.
Yep.
And so I didn't have a lot of instruction on the drum set per se. I did have some
Yeah.
from various teachers, that other professors that I got to work with in the studio. Rob Bridge comes to mind. Yeah. Anyway, but mainly what I would try to do especially with my lessons with Gordon, is because the lessons were so focused on musicality and phrasing and dynamics and bring this voice out and that sort of thing. I would take those lessons and try to apply them to the drum set, and almost think of the drum set as a marimba, if you will.
Wow.
Or like some sort of a keyboard instrument.
Yeah.
And bring that to the drum set and go, okay, so if this pattern is like this repeating thing, that should not be the loudest voice. Right? The loudest voice should be the active voice, that's the melodic voice that's moving around.
Yeah.
And so if you take the concepts and you just, remove them and put them over on the drum set, that's kind of what I would do, and use phrasing, dynamics, and if you're soloing, you don't always have to start and stop on the one.
Right.
Little things like that that really enrich your playing.
Right. Well, you don't have to, but
mind you, I've lost the rest of the band while doing that, but you have to be careful with who you're playing with sometimes.
This city is so interesting this way because, when I first moved here, there were a lot of good wood choppers, 2 and 4 guys and so forth. And there was Larry London, who was the king of the hill at that point, and who was great. And Eddie Bears became really important. But since that time, more and more guys have been coming here that are just lights out. And they've been taught by good people. They were definitely the cream of the crop in the town that they moved here from, and they'd already made a living and knew that the ceiling was higher here than it is in a lot of cities that you work in.
Yeah.
But you got, one example, there's a guy that I met a few years ago, but I've gotten to know him better now. His name is Dave Colella, and Dave plays with a blues band here called Piper in the Hard Times. And I'm talking to Dave because he's got a great groove and, really good, solid pocket and real smooth. And I said, so did you study? He said, yeah. I said, I lived in New Jersey and I studied with Joe Morello for years.
There you go. He's got his hands together, that's for sure.
I said, like the Joe Morello?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah. I said, yeah, we used to go after, I'd always move my lessons to last so we could go down to the bar afterwards and have a drink. And I'm going, yeah, well.
Smart,
yeah. So, but yeah, you got like guys like that here all the time.
Sure.
But anyway, I got off of your thing about.
No, you're exactly right. And I with the internet now, and YouTube, and it's like you can look up any drummer and any technique, and it's broken down in 12 different ways in slow motion if you want to.
Right. Yeah.
I'm old enough where I didn't have those tools at my, so we had to listen. We had to just use your ears and imagine what the drummer was doing more often than not,
Yeah.
So it's a different ball game now.
Yes.
With the younger players coming up through the ranks.
And Nashville's still letting people in, but they're getting better and better all the time.
Yeah.
Even the guys, there's guys who've studied and learned from other people, but there are guys here that are those guys too.
Mm-hmm. Well, talk about a little bit, since you've been here since the late 80s. So you've seen Nashville go through its changes, for better or for worse, and maybe talk a little bit about your take on those changes that have happened up to the current place where we are, and then maybe like where do you think things are going, or what's happening in the future, do you think?
I could answer the first part of that more easily because it's, what I've experienced and so forth. As far as the future goes, I'll just touch on that for a second. But when I moved here, I mean, I had a gig, like I said, a touring gig, and I started finding out what was going on and who's doing what in the studios. And of course, I liked working in the studio.
Yeah.
But I, trying to find out who did what and why. So sometimes I would glom on to people that were successful and try and learn from them. But the first thing that I would call attention to is when I moved here, there were no computer recorders. There were a whole slew of tape recorders.
Analog.
In an area they call Music Row.
Right.
16th. They were 16th and 17th Avenue, all the way. There was no Music Square East and so forth. It was 16th and 17th Avenue, and one of them went this way and one of them went this way, and 85% of the buildings were filled with recording studios and so forth. And it's about what did you say, an 8 or 10 block length that you go down. And so there were a lot of songwriters here, and because you'd get people that would come in, the background of Nashville, you had all these really talented people that come from the hills of Kentucky and Virginia and so forth, and sometimes Texas and so forth, that were artists and talented that way, but they weren't always great songwriters. So then you had people that were moving here who were songwriters.
Yeah. And
they would, the business people would put those people together, and they would stake a claim on part of their publishing as far as that goes, so that's how they made their money off of things. And as a result, the songwriters had to have what was called a demo that they could pitch to people all the time.
Right.
So you had these publishing companies, like before it was Sony, it was called Tree Publishing, and there were other things like that, MCA, where they would hire songwriters and pay them a salary to write songs, like the old Brill Building type of stuff.
Right.
Only on an even larger scale, because there were a whole bunch of them there. But those songwriters were constantly cutting demos in those analog recording studios.
And they needed musicians to do that.
And even if you weren't at the very top rung, you were getting, if you were worth your weight at all, you're getting called for demos. And a lot of times, you're playing those demos with the guys who were making the records also.
And so imagine what you're learning along the way.
You're learning, right. And you're getting paid a decent wage at that point, because almost everything back in those days, a lot of the stuff actually was going through the union, and you were signing a time card.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and
that sounds like great work. I mean, you're not slogging it out at some dark bar room till 2 a.m. or something. You're making your living daytime hours, right? Most of the time, probably, and in a clean environment where, very respectable.
Good equipment.
Good
engineers.
You're learning how to play to a song.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. And there was no Lower Broadway at that point. Lower Broadway was a vast wasteland. It was.
It sort of still is. In a different way.
Yes. But there was no place to play, and nobody paid anything at all.
Yeah.
There were, cheap beer halls and porno rooms and stuff like that there. But there was nothing at all like what there is now. But in the 90s, everything started to drop off, and when the computer world
Pro Tools happened.
Pro Tools and home computers and all that stuff they started sorting everything out, getting rid of the bad digital sounds and improving on everything like that. That the publishing money started to drop off. Now, in parallel with that, you got Nashville building the Bridgestone Arena downtown, right next to the last 5 blocks of Broadway up to the river.
Okay.
And then you've got the Titans.
Yes.
Building a stadium right across the river. Then you've got all this other stuff that's starting to happen downtown where people are going, oh, this is kind of a cool place to come. You know, before we go to the game, we can go have a drink. Oh, Tootsie's, that's a place. Oh, the Ryman Auditorium. They renovated the Ryman during that period of time.
Okay.
Which was really a big deal because then you got a really quality place to play for 2,000-seater.
Well, and it used to be the Opry, didn't it?
It was the Opry.
So it's the historical just alone. I mean.
So all these people are going, hey, I can make some money off of this, you know. So the bars started hiring musicians. They still weren't paying very well, but the musicians realized that they could create a culture of asking for tips while they were playing, where you could actually go downtown and you could make $80 to $200 in a shift. And if you did that 3 times a week, then you're kind of making a living at that point.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the publishing money is disappearing down there. Okay.
Right.
And the publishing companies are restructuring. They're dropping their writer staffs and so on and so forth.
Well, and the demo work that you spoke of is starting to drop off too, probably, because the computers, everything is with MIDI, everything is able to be, you know, those demos, you no longer need a 5-piece band to cut the demo. You just need one person to write out the MIDI drums and to write out the MIDI bass player and so on and so forth.
Or come in with the, you know all that stuff pre-recorded. And,
at their home, in their home studio.
So, you know,
so changes are taking place.
Changes are taking place, and I've been trying to. I got off the road in 1990 to try and start a family, and had some success with that. I got back together with a girlfriend, and we got married, and I had 2 kids. But as the 90s went along, and that started happening around 97 or 98, I'm going, I'm not making. I'm not. You know, the work is not there, and it's still not. Lower Broadway is still not what I need in order to be able to make a living off of this thing. So I'm trying to balance the.
Did you play down there?
I played some down there, and I still don't play down there very much. Part of it's because I just, I won't go into it. I don't keep up with the trends as much as most of the guys that are down there. I mean,
enough said.
A lot of those guys grew up listening to country music, and they came out of Georgia and Alabama and so forth. And it's all that there was there, and so they knew all these songs walking in there. Where I had to do homework, I got to a point where I'd learned to play the
standards,
70s, and and all that kind of stuff, and got pretty good at that. And then that started to disappear. Unless you play at Roberts, and. So late 70s came, and Michael Rhodes, who we mentioned earlier, had recommended me to a couple of different things. There was a songwriter here named Gary Nicholson, great songwriter. He had his own band, and Michael Rhodes recommended me to sub in his band, playing locally at the 3rd and Lindsley's and the 12th and Porters and so forth. And So Chad Cromwell was his main drummer, but I got the sub for that, and so I did probably a dozen gigs with Gary, and Gary had come to appreciate what I did, and Gary had just produced an album for Delbert McClinton in about '97. One of the Fortunate Few was the name of it, and Gary contacted me and says, Delbert's about to go out on the road. He wants a new rhythm section. Can you recommend a bass player and come and audition for him? I went, yeah, I'll suffice to say Delbert had a reputation as being hard on drummers. And I didn't go for it immediately, but we talked about it and we worked something out with him. So I went ahead and auditioned and got hired for it and so on and so forth. So I did that for a while, and I just decided it wasn't working the way I wanted it to, so I left that situation with the tip of the hat to Delbert, who's a brilliant artist, and everybody, and Gary and so forth. Then I went to work, went back on the road with Leroy Parnell, who was a kind of a gunslinger, slide guitar guy from Texas. That was a lot of fun. He's had a lot of influences, Allman Brothers and that sort of thing. So we did that for a few years, and then I kind of just backed off, went through a few changes, went through some personal changes, and then wound up in kind of around 2010, 2011, reinventing myself at that point, and started doing the studio thing more and more, and producing, and working in my own place.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what's brought me to this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a good place to start talking about your new record then.
What I contacted you about to say, hey, Brian, help me get this out in front of people.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can help you with that, but
Right. I've watched your videos, and they're great. They're really cool. And I thought this is a quality place that I would like, if you would let me, to come and talk about.
You're always welcome here anytime. Yeah, so what is the name of the new record, and when will it be released?
The name of the new record is Pocket Change.
Good title.
We get a kick out of that because some people know immediately what it means, and some people don't know immediately.
A little bit double entendre, maybe.
It is a double entendre, that's
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. And my girlfriend, who is also a publicist, she's had to explain it to a number of people, and so have I.
Okay.
But,
as you do, yeah.
Yeah, and what happened was that back near the beginning of COVID, we had just finished off our studio,
Yes.
which we had built, kind of has some parallels to this.
Mhm.
And so through COVID, I did a first solo album.
Yes. You have a prior record to this.
I do.
Right.
Yeah, it's called Mood Swings. And I did a lot of remote stuff where I'd cut tracks and I'd send them off to Louisiana or, to another place here in Nashville.
And this was right around like 2020 during the COVID. Yeah, well, a lot of us were doing that.
Right.
And a lot of us got into it because of that even. Right.
So my girlfriend, who was not my girlfriend obviously to begin with, who is a publicist, I presented her with a project from a band that I had nurtured and produced an album for. And it was good. They were really great musicians in that band, and then we had a falling out, and I just said, okay, you guys go. I'm going to do my own thing, because part of the problem was I was a band leader, but I wasn't the lead singer.
Yes.
And there were people going, well, this guy's the band leader. He's the focal point of this, and I'd been managing it and booking it and rehearsing it and doing all this grunt work. And the guys, said, well, we're not going to let you make all the decisions anymore. I went, okay, you make your decisions, and I'm going to go to work on my album because I can't fire me. Okay. So I went in and did that first album. And my girlfriend, who's, she's really, under the radar, but an excellent publicist. And she's worked with a lot of really great artists, mostly blues things, and my stuff had a blues tinge to it. So she puts, we did mail-outs of the first album, and I got a lot of really good press from it, a lot of great reviews. And so forth. Yeah, but it was still COVID, and I couldn't go out and
couldn't play.
Play, yeah.
Right.
So we let it run its course, and then I decided to do this thing again as COVID started letting up, and so I started to work on Pocket Change, and now I'm going to release it. We're going to release it to all the outlets, to Spotify's and the Apple Music this Friday, September 20th.
Okay.
And I have a band that I've put together to go out and perform with it now. So we're working towards that.
Okay, so who plays on the new record?
I did all of the drums and all the percussion.
Yep. And you sing?
And I sing, and I wrote 7, I think, of the 10 songs on it.
Okay, great. I want to go somewhere with that, so hold that thought, but keep going.
And co-wrote.
Yep.
Wrote or co-wrote.
Okay.
Yeah. And I used a couple of 2-3 different bass players. Paul Asolo, who was on the Saturday Night Live band for years.
Yes.
And he toured with Levon Helm, and he had done, other stuff. And so he was my greasy bass player.
Yes.
And if I had something that had some grease to it, that was the guy.
I badly want to meet him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And then used Bob Marinelli a little bit, who had played with Beth Hart for years and done some country gigs. And I used just a couple of other people.
These are all friends of yours?
Yeah.
The people that you've played with in the past?
Yes.
Is there anybody that you called to play on the record that you didn't know or hadn't played with before?
Yeah. Yeah,
There was,
on the
okay.
second record, well, I'll preface this by saying the main guitar player that I used on most of the stuff is a guy named Will McFarland, who lives in Muscle Shoals, and I had played in that ill-fated band that I was no longer with, but kept my friendship with him.
Mm-hmm.
And Will played for Bonnie Raitt for a couple of albums and lived out in Los Angeles. And so whenever he would come into Nashville, I would grab him and use him on tracks for stuff that I had cut the tracks. And a lot of times I'd figure out what the song was, and I would go into the studio and I'd put down a click, and I would know in my head what the song was going to sound like, and I would cut the drum track all by itself.
Wow.
Yeah. And so
that's impressive.
that was,
I've never tried doing that.
well, it makes you be musical.
I'll say this: there was a remote session once
Yeah.
where somebody had sent me a song, and it was the demo, the guitar scratch track was so unusable
Yeah.
that I actually just charted it out
Right.
and
recut it.
recorded it to click.
Right.
So that's the only time I've ever really experienced something like that. But it wasn't my song, and it was still a song that was sort of somewhat sketched out.
Yeah.
It wasn't just in my head. Yeah.
Well, sometimes what I would do is I'd write the song, and then there was another guitar player, John Prestia, who would come
Mhm.
over, and he would, play the parts where I had stops and as they say in Nashville, diamonds,
Yes.
which are also known as whole notes or half notes.
Shh, don't tell them.
We would put just like a guitar track down,
Yeah.
and then so
Yeah.
I had that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
that's certainly helps.
Right.
Just
And I would play
harmonically and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'd put the drums down to that. Then I'd usually add the bass and then start to work on other guitar parts and keyboards
And as the singer, you're singing the part in your head, so you're feeling that as well.
And fairly early on, I would put a scratched vocal down.
Yeah, that makes sense to me more than just any random drummer recording a song from scratch like that, because as the drummer, you don't know when the vocals are, you don't know the phrasing of the vocals. Like, how am I going to not step on the vocal? But as the drummer and the singer, that now you know where the vocals come in and when they, and you're not going to step on yourself in that way.
Yeah. So do you ever record other instruments here?
I have, just for rehearsals. I haven't, nothing that's been released. No.
Okay.
I would like to start doing that, though. I'm interested.
One of the things that happens is that if you're cutting something like that, and I found that as the further I went, the more I liked the idea of cutting the drums first.
Yes.
Or just making a keeper drum track that was going to correspond.
Just like
with
a template almost.
a template, yeah.
Yeah.
But then I would get to the point where the drums were going to be what I was going to keep.
Yes.
Okay? And then I would start putting the keeper guitars and the basses and so on and so forth.
Right.
Because, if you go in and you cut a track, if you cut it with a click track, unless it's the best musicians in the world, that music is going to breathe back and forth with or without the click track. And if you got somebody that's playing the part but doesn't necessarily know what you're going to end up with, you either have to re-record them until they get closer to that click track, or you got to go in and edit it in to where it's going to feel right.
Right.
Because I would guess that that no matter how much you are on the money, you're still going to vary slightly from beats here and there.
Well, we're human after all, and that's what makes us human.
Yeah,
And
right. And I'm definitely like that. So when I had the ability to really concentrate on the drums, that allowed me to put the drum track down as accurately as possible with the click track. And then I could listen to the guitar, and I didn't have to say, well, am I ahead or am I behind, or is the guitar ahead or guitar? Then I could bring up the click and say, nope, I got it right. We got to recut this, or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, and you're playing blues and soul style music, and so you definitely don't want to quantize anything. You want to keep the humanity, the soul, in the music.
Yep.
And so I think it's important to have those little imperfections. I think that's where the magic lies,
you want
personally.
You want it to feel right.
Yeah, it's a feel.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't line up exactly with the click, that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Yeah. But have you ever been in a session where there is a click track and you're playing along and the guitar player is so far ahead of the beat at that point, he rolls his eyes, folks.
Unfortunately, yes.
He is so far ahead of the beat that you got to decide whether you're going to play with the guitar player or you're going to play with the click at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's especially hard in remote sessions where the guitar part is already recorded, and I sometimes have to ask, is this a scratch part? Is this going to be replaced, or is that going to be on, is that ink? Is that going to stay? Because if it's going to stay, now I have to adjust what I'm doing to that guitar part.
The phrase has actually come out of my mouth. Do you want me to play with the click, or do you want me to play with the guitar player on this?
Yeah, because it's different.
And a lot of times there's deer in the headlights. What will happen?
Yeah, yeah. With instrumentalists who maybe don't have such a grand concept of time and feel.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
you can scare them.
Yeah, right. And the problem is if you do go with the guitar player, at what point does the guitar player sync back up with the click? So it's something that is unique to us as drummers.
Yes.
That we have to deal with. And when you get into higher levels, and you got people like Brent Mason, and Michael Rhodes, and so
the A-listers, right?
They know that's their responsibility to not have to
absolutely. They're as much a timekeeper as we are.
Yes.
Right.
And that's a lot of the reason why those guys are doing the big ones.
I would say.
They know that.
I would say.
A lot of guys go into the studio and they just go, oh, that sounds good to me, and you go, well, yes, but.
Well, everyone's working on, harmony and their, playing changes and all their licks and stuff. And it's like, if you haven't worked on your time, that's the most important thing.
It is. And it's not to take anything away because they are good musicians.
Yeah.
Usually. But there are subtleties that we are forced to learn about what it is that we're doing here that force us to become better at that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so when you get into something like this, and I'm building something, the drum track's got to be right, or they're going to have to decide: do you want me to play with the drummer or the click track on it? So so that's part of what it is that you're dealing with. So anyway, I built things, a lot of things from the tracks that way. And as I said, I got about halfway through the album, and I had tried to do stuff where I would just cut a track with somebody else, and I'd realize I can't do this. I can't work with this. So although I had the song figured out, I would take the instruments at that point and turn them way down, turn the click up, and replay the drums to that, and then rebuild the song.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you. You said you write and you co-write. What is your process for writing songs? Describe to me. Where do you get ideas? How do you organize your ideas? How do you get them down so that they turn into songs? I struggle with this, so I'm really interested in your process.
Well, finally somebody asked me that question that I want to answer them on it, okay?
Okay.
Because I get, when I do, a fair number of interviews and in relation to releasing this thing, and there's so many times they'll say, where do you get your ideas? How do you write your songs? For me, a lot of the times, I write my songs based on the groove of the song.
Interesting.
Yep. And, if I've got, like, for instance, there's a song that if we get to here, we play, there's a Little Feat, or there's a song that's really heavily Little Feat influenced.
Okay.
And, when I sat down to write it, I thought, this is the feel I want for it. And it helped me to put the song together at that point.
Okay.
So I may have even put down a scratch drum track, or I can't remember whether I had the guitar player just play with the click. But once I get that, I don't write real sophisticated chord progressions. Most of it's 1, 4, 5, or 2, or 6, or something like that. And
3 chords and the truth.
Yeah. And I'll change the arrangements a little bit.
Okay.
But and then I figure out thematically what I want to say. I usually do that fairly early on. What's the song going to be about?
Where does that come from?
From Nashville.
From your experiences.
From my experiences, yes. One of the great things that happened to me going back into the 90s was that although I was not a first call album player, I got to work with some great songwriters doing demos. And there was a guy named Gary Burr that I worked with that wrote all these hits back in the 90s. And he was writing with, all these Hall of Fame songwriters. And he I don't know if he is or by now, but someday he'll be a Hall of Fame songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And watching him work concept-wise, what he would do lyrically if somebody came to him and said, I want to, write a song called The Sky's the Limit,
Okay.
And you think, okay, here's this, I'm in love and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And Gary would take that song and turn it around and say, I'm sitting here at home thinking about my days, about how when I met you, I thought the sky is the limit. But now I'm here with a broken heart,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's talent.
Yeah, well,
That's cool.
To not go to the most obvious thing, to pull people in and to write something lyrically.
I see.
Yeah.
So he takes a germ of an idea and runs with it, but also twists it into something else.
A lot of times he
That's
would
cool.
twist it, yes.
That's smart.
I mean, he
And
had a
it's-
song called, you lived your life and you traveled the road, but I was just a station on the line. Great metaphors,
Yes.
and concepts and stuff like that. And he was a great writer. And
Like an image pops into my head is just as you say that. Like it's like, wow, the imagery.
yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. So yeah, that improved my writing a lot. Working with other writers. Because actually, I went to Gary. I'd started writing, and I had some people that were pitching some of my songs, and I went to Gary Burr and I said, "Hey, I'm getting some songs, pitched by this publishing company and so forth. Would you write with me?" And Gary, who was at the top of the heap at that point, he really liked me. He had used me as his drummer in the studio for a couple of years already, and he kind of, went like this and said, "Andy, business-wise, I can't afford to write with you." And I went, "What?" He said, "Every time I have an open slot to write a song, my publishing company insists that I write it with somebody who's already had million-selling records at that point." And he said, "If I start writing with people who don't have a resume as a writer, they're going to say, 'What are you doing? Why are you wasting time writing with these people who aren't other people?' Because if you put Gary Burr up there and Harlan Howard as the two co-writers on it, a producer gets the song and they go, 'Let's listen to this.'
Yeah.
Then you get a demo that says Gary Burr, Andy Peake on it, and you go, 'All right, well, we'll listen to that in a minute.'" That's the
It's
thing.
tough business, isn't
So
it?
if you work with songwriters, and Harry Stinson, who plays with Marty Stewart's group, also, I asked him one time after a gig he did at Bluebird. I said, "What do you do to get to work in Nashville?" He said, "Pay attention to the songwriters."
Yeah.
Because this is a songwriter town,
Yeah.
and it's not an orchestral town, it's not a film town, and so on and so forth. It's a songwriter town, and especially at that time, you paid attention to what they were writing and what the forms were and so on.
Yeah.
And so
The
forth.
song is the king. Yeah.
So it sunk in here to a great degree as far as what I got out of it to start writing.
So to go back to your own process, when you're writing a song, and you said it starts with the groove a lot of times, but let's say you're starting to get now into the chord progression and the meat of the song, if you will. Are you writing it down like pencil and paper? Are you using MIDI? Are you recording it into your computer, into your DAW? Or how is it? What's your workflow like?
Most of the time it's pencil and paper with a guitar or a piano.
Do you play guitar?
Just enough.
And piano too?
Just enough to be able to
write.
Yeah. And once again, if you go back to the number system thing, if you hear something in your head and you hear a melody going that way, and the melody has come to you, and you hear it make a chord change, you can go over the piano and go dong, dong. All of a sudden, okay, this next chord is built on that note of it. And so You can MIDI put that into the song, or you can play it on guitar just enough to show you where the changes are and what then I have somebody come in that can really play it.
Right.
And then that's
Right.
how I put it together.
Right.
So that's pretty much the way that it works.
Because I'm just wondering, it's like sometimes I can sit down and come up with an idea, but how do I get this idea down so that tomorrow when I wake up, I remember what this idea is?
Yep, you got to write it down.
You have to find a way to record it somehow, either record it on paper or actually record it in a DAW. Yeah.
And that's another thing. A lot of times I'll do turn my phone on and do just enough of it and write the words out so that when I refer back to it, I can say to the person that's really playing it, oh, yeah, no, that's a 2-chord there. Or,
What about lyrics?
Lyrics are something that most good writers will write a framework of, and they'll get real close to it. Because if they're writing themselves, whether I'm writing just by myself or with somebody, I try and get real close to what I'm going to do with it: verse, chorus, bridge, verse, outro, and that sort of thing. So I may make some changes in it, but usually if I get it to a point where I'm going to produce it into a song, I have an idea of what the song is supposed to be at that point.
Okay, great. This is great. So as the singer, or as a singer, do you have any formal voice training?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Myself as well. Like through music school,
Right.
I had like a semester of classical voice training, learning how to use your voice properly, that kind of thing.
A quick story about that. I went to college in a little town in Missouri, Northwest Missouri State University.
Okay.
And I'd been in a band in high school. It was such a small town that I played in with the college guys before I was out of high school.
Yeah.
And so when I went into college, and I'd been kind of a lead singer in that band.
Okay.
Doing, singing
From the drums.
from the drums.
Right.
And so when we got into college, we put a band together of all the guys in the music department: bass player, horn section,
Yep.
and a guitar player, and so on and so forth. And this was way back when Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears
Cool.
were just coming in, and the band Dreams, which was Billy Cobham and
Yes.
the Brecker Brothers and so forth.
Yes.
And we had one guy in the band, who I'll get to in a second, who was hip enough to bring that into us and show us. So we're doing, Lucretia McKeevill and You Made Me So Very Happy. And
It's my dad's music. I grew up on that stuff,
I
though.
told you,
Yeah.
people say that to me all the time.
Well, but this is not your music. I mean, this is like what this is what we were raised on,
You
though.
couldn't help but hear it.
Yeah, it was fantastic music.
So we're doing some Chicago songs, okay? And the trumpet player in the band, who's like he had a really high range. He was like Maynard Ferguson
Okay.
Fan and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
He comes into rehearsal one night and says, "Hey, I want to do this. You guys mind if we do this song by Chicago? I wrote a chart out for the horns and stuff." And of course, me being my prideful, asshole drummer that I am, I said, "Sure, Bob, go ahead. We'll go ahead and we'll try it." So he hands out the charts, and the guitar player's already figured dun 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 dun. So his beginnings.
Okay.
Dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
And this voice, he comes in with this voice that goes, "When I'm with you," and everybody just drops. The jaw just drops. It goes, "What just happened? Who is this guy?"
Uh-huh.
And so he was immediately promoted to lead singer.
Okay. Wow.
He would keep his trumpet over here, and he'd pull it out every now and then.
Wow.
He was such a great singer. And
Oh.
he was so hip, and he ended up getting a degree from Berkeley that he did before it was online. He would just send things back and forth to him.
Oh.
And his name was Bob Harris,
Mm-hmm.
and he was from a little town called Greenfield, Iowa, and we were roommates together for a while. We left college together and moved to Gainesville, Florida. But he was a really talented guy, is a really talented guy, and we bounced around and we crossed paths several times over the years and tried to play in the bands a couple of times. And he eventually got with a band that got signed to MCA and did an album that nothing happened to. But he had a friend and another guy that I had worked with who was a whiz kid, electronics and studio guy, who got hired by Frank Zappa to work in Frank Zappa's studio. And so Bob Harris, gets a call and says, Warren Zevon needs somebody to do simple keyboards and background vocals. And so he goes and he works with Zevon for a while, did a live album with him, and then he gets a call and says, I need you to come in and do some Zappa vocals because this other guy we got is great, but he doesn't have the range for it. So Bob goes in, starts singing parts for Frank Zappa, and gets hired into Frank Zappa's band.
Holy.
Yeah. So this is my roommate in college who had done nothing. And there were two Bob Harrises in the Frank Zappa band, and he was a later one.
Okay.
But I got a picture of him standing next to Vinny and Steve Vai. And,
wow.
Yeah, right.
Very cool.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the.
So who's your favorite singing drummer?
Live, dead, or either.
Either.
Okay. I love Levon Helm.
Okay.
You know, he's such a soulful guy. And,
yes.
As Leroy Parnell called him one time, he's a national treasure. But as far as being a singing drummer who, has the spotlight all the time, there aren't really that many of them. Phil Collins, of course, and he got out from behind the drums for the most part.
Yes.
And Buddy Miles.
Yes.
Now, that was an interesting one.
Yes.
He was a great drummer, but Levon probably takes the cake.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know of too many of them now at this point.
Dave Grohl, I guess, would be the last.
He went up front too.
You're right.
Yeah. And
You're right.
Actually, that's what I'm doing now also. I've got another guy playing drums.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm going out front, and I've got a percussion set up, so I can play percussion while he's playing drums.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can do like a double drum thing like Genesis?
I think it's going to probably just stay like this to begin with.
Okay.
Because,
yeah.
For a gear,
that alone,
space,
I know.
I got to start.
A lot of clubs don't have room for. They don't even have the inputs for it.
But he's a guy that moved here not that long ago, and I loved the way he played. He was really personable, really nice, and complimented me, which will get you a long ways in life.
Mm-hmm.
And he came from New Orleans.
Okay.
So he had that background.
He's got that grease to him, yeah.
And he was just starting to get hired on some stuff, and I said to him, his name is Rob Lee, I said, Rob, are you working that much? Not so much.
I know Rob.
Right. I said, Rob, you need to come check this thing out, okay?
Fantastic.
Yeah. So Rob's playing drums in it, and I'm playing percussion.
Oh, great. I got to see this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's moved me up front, and I've been up front, probably 50 times in my life of being up front in the band. But
what's that? Yeah, I mean that's because that's a huge transition. I mean, as a drummer, I know what it's like to have that safety zone, the safety net of the drum set on stage with you.
Yeah.
And you're seated, and most of the time nobody can really see you anyway. You're very small parts of you. But now you're moving up front, and you don't have anywhere to put your arms, and that is a whole nother ball game up there.
What do you do in between?
How do I act? How do I connect with the audience?
That's a big deal, and that's one of the things that I'm going through at this point.
Yeah.
So having the percussion there helps.
Yes. Okay. Right.
A lot of times I can
pick up a tambourine and.
Right. But there are songs that there aren't percussion on.
Right.
So I got to figure.
Right. Right.
And there are artists that I hear and that I see that are engaging.
Yeah.
They just are interesting up there.
Absolutely.
They're doing things with their bodies and hands and emotions and so forth that pull you in.
Okay, so favorite lead singer of all time? Favorite front man?
Yeah, I think it would have to be probably Paul Rogers from a Bad Company that sang Ready for Love, I'm ready for love, and I can't get enough of your love, all that stuff, soulful singer,
Mm-hmm.
and they're up in the years, my age or more, and so it's tough for them to really do anything anymore. But he's got so many great vocal tracks over the years.
Yeah.
And I was a huge Little Feat fan.
Yes.
And I loved Lowell George, and Paul Barrera was great also. All the guys in Little Feat, and any number of the guys that came through Tower of Power were great.
Mm-hmm.
They're all rhythmic bands,
Mm.
And
Talk about singing rhythmically.
Yeah.
Talk about like what does it mean? I want to frame this right, because I sometimes struggle when I hear singers that don't sing in time. Does that make sense?
It's funny because I'll toss something, and we could be here all afternoon. By the way,
Very well.
so I got a daughter. Okay, my
Yes.
youngest child, her name is Maggie Peake, but she goes by the professional name Emlyn, Emlyn.
Okay.
And Maggie has done so well. She went to college. She was, had a song on Coffee House Channel as Maggie Peake, and then she, got through college and moved out to L.A. and started becoming a pop artist. And she's done really well.
Great.
She just got noticed by Spotify as one of the 4 new artists to watch in the coming years.
Fantastic.
I have a picture of her standing in Times Square with a giant picture on one of the screens behind her in Times Square.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I just went to visit her a couple of weeks ago, and she says to me, it drives me crazy when singers don't sing in time. And I'm going, I didn't necessarily raise her well, but she figured it out.
Okay. All right. Well, you did something right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth?
Man,
It makes so much difference to the pocket.
doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It just boggles my mind how
Delbert
singers
McLin is
great
great at playing and singing in the pocket.
Delbert McLin?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
He probably plays drums,
Yeah.
a little bit. I
He
mean,
didn't need to.
that's the thing is I recommend for any of you non-drummers out there, I recommend playing. It's like sitting down at a drum kit and just play.
Yeah.
Just try to play a beat,
Yeah.
because you can take that experience with you to whatever instrument that it is that
Yeah.
you do,
Right.
and singing is certainly included in that. It's just the idea of like, okay, how do I play in time? How do I play eighth notes here
Yeah.
and quarter notes there?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take that with me, and the next time I sing a song, it's going to be in eighth notes.
Yeah.
The eighth notes are going to lock in
Yeah.
with the drummer who's playing eighth notes. What a concept.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why I think I like singing drummers so much
Yeah.
is because their vocals are in time.
Yeah.
And it propels the music in a different sort of way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's harder to sing out of time when you're a drummer
Yeah.
than it is to sing.
Yeah,
in
to
time.
float over, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you got these two things that there's a wire going in between them, and oh yeah, I mean the singers that have become famous and successful over the years that don't sing out of time, especially in Nashville.
Yes.
It really loses me,
Yeah, the back phrasing sometimes.
Yeah, not having that pocket there.
Yeah.
Really, yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more with you. But that's interesting that you would bring that up. And it's funny that Maggie, when I was talking with her, it just kind of came out of nowhere, and I thought, this is wonderful because it's not anything I ever have to talk with her about.
Right. She came up with that all on her own.
And she said, I'll usually sing it till I get it right, rather than use the Pro Tools to move
Right.
it.
Right. Fly it around. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's more feel. that goes into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's,
Just the breathing part of it is in time. A lot.
Yeah.
If you listen to like somebody like Michael Jackson in his vocals, and
yeah.
it's all perfectly in the pocket.
Did you ever sing in a band?
Not lead.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally, but I mean more BGVs than anything else. I'm very comfortable doing that, and I enjoy it.
And you sang like in your college choir type of thing?
I did not. I was too cool back then, and I so regret feeling like that.
Yeah.
I so would have done that.
Yeah.
knowing what I know now.
Right.
But I sang with my family band when I was growing up, and I sang with my garage band in high school, and ever since then, and just always, I always felt like more part of the music if I was able to sing harmony parts.
Yeah. Yeah. My mom was a singer, so I grew up listening to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, I think it makes you more musical, even if you don't do it regularly. If it's not your focus, I worked all of this time since I've moved here. And I'm worked for years, and I never got to the very pinnacle, but I am a working musician.
Absolutely.
And, more often than not, because I don't play very intricate stuff. I admire you because you went past where I did as far as what you could do on a drum set. But so often people will say to me, "You play musically."
Yeah.
And if you can hear the song, and if you can hear the lyrics, and and in production, that's something that so many times, if I've got, all right, I got parts here, I want you to put a guitar lick in between the lyrics at this point, most of the time, the guys that are really good at it know how to drop those things in there without stepping on the vocals.
Right.
Right. Even on a fill, if I go to do a fill on the drums and they're finishing out a vocal phrase and I'm stepping on that with the fill, I go, I can't,
Yeah.
I need to save this fill for another time if I'm going to do it,
Yeah.
What a difference it makes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yes.
And it could be the difference between us getting hired and not getting hired in those situations. Yeah.
Yep. For sure.
Yep. And I was the singer and the drummer on my album, so I got to, although I would rehire myself, I would fire myself on a regular basis.
I think that's a good thought. Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. That's all great stuff that you're talking about. Yeah. So that's pretty ambitious, this Miles Davis thing that you've done.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah.
You ever talked about? I haven't caught that on one of your video programs here. Have you talked about the?
Not a lot. No. I guess I'll start at the beginning. When I lived in Las Vegas, the idea came from a friend of mine, and her idea was to put this band together with me and this trumpet player. Chandler Judkins is his name, and Chandler and I used to play gigs together around Las Vegas. Both of us no longer live in Vegas anymore, but so this idea came along that we'd put a band together, and what better way to play together than to have a trumpet player and a drummer, a jazz drummer. And so we decided, let's play the music of Miles Davis, and let's turn this into something. So we started writing arrangements, the two of us, for the band, and we had a different name for it back then, and we just would hire other people, that we had worked with, friends of ours, to be part of the band. There were different iterations of it. So I forget, I don't know what year that was, but it's going back quite a ways now. Anyway, fast forward, I left Las Vegas, moved here to Nashville, and after about a year or so, I really missed playing that music again, and thought, well, geez, I've got all these arrangements made, and it's really something that I'd like to continue doing. And at that point, I'd been here about a year and had met, some guys that I thought they'd be a good fit for this. And so I called them all together and just sort of put it together here in Nashville. And so I called it I was trying to think of a name that would be like a cool name, but like give it sort of like make it sort of obvious as to what it was in a way. So I called it Milestones, it being miles, and separating out the word milestones into miles and tones. And so I'm so clever. but so Milestones, tribute to Miles Davis. And so that was back in 2017 when I formed the now current version of the band. And over the years, I've written more and more arrangements, and I have 25 songs in the book now.
Cool.
It's mainly based and focused on the two great quintets that Miles led.
Right.
'Cause a lot of times people ask me, like, what era? I mean, there's so much to draw from,
Right.
you know. I want to stay mostly in that bop and post-bop
Right.
era.
Or earlier.
And some of the earlier stuff, too. And I am drawing, there's some tunes that are on the periphery of those, too. There's some real early stuff that we do, like the Autumn Leaves arrangement.
Right.
And then, and like Roundabout Midnight, like, you know, from that record.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, like into the 80s, I have an arrangement of Jean-Pierre, so it's kind of a funk
Yeah.
kind of thing with Mike Stern, you know, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, all those, you know,
Okay.
Marcus Miller and that kind of vein. So it is, you know, but the one thing I'm not doing is the half-hour D minor jams from like the late 60s into the 70s kind of. I've stayed away from that just because it would just be too hard to notate, or even I mean, these are just jam sessions basically. They weren't. There's no head
Right.
on a lot of these songs.
Yeah.
I'm sticking more to the traditional
Yeah.
jazz bop.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
get you.
Yeah.
So do you have a Mandela album?
I don't know it that well.
Okay.
No.
No, I'm just curious. I had it at one point and that's where I really became familiar with Marcus Miller.
Okay.
Because I think he was a producer on it.
Yes.
But yeah, no, and it's vanished. I was just curious about
Okay.
it. I had to
Okay.
go
Yeah.
look for it. But yeah, I like that. I like that part of it too. Some of the Bitches Brew stuff kind of, I got a little bit worn out because I'm not as much of a jazzer. You know,
Yeah.
I don't have the.
Yeah,
affinity
some of
for
it can be challenging. I mean, even for me, I consider myself a jazz musician through and through. But like, some of it's like, man, where are we going with this?
Right,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
Right. Well, that was part of that was where they kept
the
they kept
psychedelic
reaching,
kind
you
of
know,
thing.
that's
Yeah,
for sure.
right. And they were reaching, and it was, you know, profound in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But also some of it just doesn't hold. It doesn't hit me right here,
Yeah.
where like a lot of the two great quintets, like,
Yeah.
you know, the Wayne Shorter compositions, and
Yeah.
you know, Philly Joe Jones, and like all, you know, like, because we play Two Bass Hit, and we play, you know, Milestones, the tune, and we're doing the stuff from Kind of Blue, you know.
Right. There's a really good Wayne Shorter documentary out there, by the way.
I have to watch that. I have yet to see that, and I keep forgetting that it's out there.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, he's such a beautiful guy.
Yes.
You know, inside and so forth.
I read his, I think it's an autobiography. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he struggled. He was so dedicated to it and so forth that there was a certain a portion of narcissism to him, but there was also a heart that he had that was just like he really wanted to make the music. You know,
Gentle.
and he struggled with it at different times with what he was forced to do and, you know, where he ended up. But
well, and then his whole thing with Weather Report.
yeah,
I mean,
oh God,
yes.
oh,
Yes.
unbelievable.
Yes. What a career. Yes.
What a life-changing
Yeah.
album that was for so many of us. You know.
Yeah, and the tunes he wrote for the Art Blakey and the Messengers. I mean,
I know. You know, it does segments on that. I shouldn't say album. I should say albums. But you know, what Heavy Weather was like. You know, I mean, I woke up one day and went, "Oh, what planet am I on?"
yeah.
You know.
I had that record in high school. Just
Yeah.
inhaled it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so well, that's cool. That's really interesting. I wondered where all all of that came from with you.
Yeah, it's just fun to play that music, you know. So many of those songs are just great vehicles for improv.
Yeah.
And it's just so fun, and I want to play jazz for an audience.
Yeah.
And so no one's going to come and hear Brian Czach, the Brian Czach band.
All right. Yeah.
Probably nobody.
Well,
You know, but
yeah.
if I play the music of Miles Davis,
Yeah.
I practically sell the room out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so that's a lot of fun,
Yes, it is. Yeah.
you know?
That's great. Really cool.
And if you do it at a level that, you know, I'm taking the arrangements, lifting them right off the record, so it's familiar, you know, to the audience. When they hear us play, they hear the record.
Yeah. Right.
only it's live.
Now, is Steve Herman doing that with you?
Steve
most
Herman
of the time?
plays yeah, and I know he played on your record, didn't
Yes,
he?
did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both records, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, actually, he didn't. He played on the band record, Big Shoes, and
Okay.
and then he played on this most recent one.
Okay.
But yeah, he's he's about as good as they get around here. That's
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, he's wonderful.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I hope to take it to, like, I'm trying to find ways to make it more of an educational thing as well, and maybe bring it to schools and universities.
Wonderful.
And do like clinics and masterclass style, along with a performance maybe. I'm trying to get all that. It's a lot of work, a lot of organization, a lot of emails and phone calls, and
Yeah.
it's hard to find the time in my, because of my freelance career.
That's great.
But yeah.
I
I might need your promoter there, your marketing person.
that's not her focus, but she could help you to figure out where to go.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I recently, my fingers in so many different pies. One of the things I do is I do some sound reinforcement. I have, twice a month gig I do at a drug treatment center where I bring people in and run sound for them. And then I've been doing sound for the
drum clinics.
The drum clinic.
I've seen you.
Closet.
Right.
Yeah.
And
that's great. And
there's a clinic coming up with Rich Redmond.
You know what? They've postponed it.
Oh.
They had a date for him, and they've moved it now. They may have rescheduled it, but he got called to do a video with Jason Aldean that day.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Well, I talked to Daniel about it a week or two ago, and they were looking at rescheduling. They may have. So, yeah, I need to check in with him about it. But yeah, what a great clinic he gives too.
Yeah.
He's so shy.
Rich, if you're out there, we love you.
Yeah. Oh God, we really do love you, Rich. They broke the mold for Rich Redmond, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
So anyway, do we have time to play a song?
Oh gosh, yes, yes. Let me pull that up real quick here.
So I'll tell you with the. Let's do the. If we can do two of them, let's do the first two songs, okay? Because the first song starts out with the percussion section, okay? And it's me playing all the percussion instruments on it, and I wrote it as a up-tempo love song. Is basically what it is, but it's got some really great guitar work on it from Will McFarlane, who played on a lot of this stuff, and Steve Egan. It's got some great harmonica work from Tim Gartland on it. And it's just a fun little tune with a really nice groove to it. So, yeah, so that's as good as it gets.
Okay, here it comes.
Put all your money down. I'm taking every last bet. This is the best game in town. It hasn't failed me yet. And she'll be mine forever. 'Cause she's as good as it gets. You know I gamble around, and I played every card to find a love supreme. I didn't get very far, but when she told me her name, I said I know who you are. Chances to feel so right. Now there ain't no lies or freaky dances. It's just good loving every night.
Some really nice harmonies on it. I think you did.
Little Feat fan for years and started a band that you played percussion with us on a gig, yeah. And
yes. Yes, you asked me to play percussion once, and I told you I'm gonna beat up my little fragile hands here, my little drum set player hands.
It's a whole nother animal, that's for sure.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I learned it. Years ago, when I first left college, I moved to Gainesville, Florida, and I met some really good, Latin percussionists that showed me a few tricks on it, and I worked on it to the point where I've been able to use it. I can't play with the big boys. My left hand pop is not great, but I could.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing.
It is.
Yeah.
But I do it just well enough that on pop and rhythm and blues, I can do it pretty well. So.
Yeah.
So I carried that into this. So that's what's that one. And there's conga drums on several of the songs on this album. And then the second song that we'll play a little bit of is it's called The Scuffle. And,
okay.
And
what's a scuffle?
The Scuffle. I'm glad you asked that question, which you probably already know the answer.
I do, but I want our listeners to know.
Here's you got a rock beat that goes
straight eighth notes.
Straight eighths, yeah.
Right.
And then you got a swing beat that's
right. The traditional shuffle rhythm.
Traditional shuffle, or right. That,
right.
Depending on what you play with your right hand, it's a shuffle or it's a swing beat.
Right.
But then there's a spot in between. That's about this big. Okay? Here's your straight eights and here's your shuffle, and there's this area in between.
Yes.
That you can go.
Yes.
Where it's got a little bit of swing to it.
And it's magical.
And it's magical. And it's got its own vibe to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not easy to play because it takes a drummer who understands both the straight eighth and the shuffle swing eighth note.
Yep.
And to have a grasp on both of those to really put it somewhere in the middle and make it feel good.
Yep. And I think it started out when everything was swing back in the 50s, and then people wanted to start playing straight eights, and then you had a guitar player that could only play and a drummer who's playing.
Well, rock and roll, right?
Yeah.
That's where it all comes from.
And if you listen to, like, for instance, Johnny Be Good, the original, Chuck Berry stuff was
there.
Like
you go.
And so we tried to come up with a word for it. So somebody quoted the phrase. I think it was Stuart Zeff came up with the phrase "scuffle."
Who came up with it? Stuart?
There's a guy that used to live here that's played with War and a bunch of different people, and it has this push and pull kind of tug to it.
Yep.
But it doesn't go. I cut it with a click.
Yeah. Yes.
So it never goes out of that, but
right. It's consistent.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's got this little to it, and you got.
It's got a little hump to it.
It's got a hump. You hear it in the Chuck Berry stuff. You hear John Hyatt does it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Bonnie Raitt does it all on a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
Little Feat.
Yes.
It's all over.
Right. I never heard the term scuffle till I moved here to Nashville.
Right. Yeah.
And then somebody told me, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
So it's an art form in a sense, and I love to play it.
Same.
Yeah. And
well, let's hear some of it.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
And that happens to be the name of the song too, The Scuffle. You're gonna start to move, we're gonna scuffle. You rock straight ahead and then you shuffle until it feels just right. Ahead, behind, and in between. Now you're doing that scuffle thing. Now old Chuck Berry and Bonnie Raitt, they play it right but don't play it straight. They might take a turn, even jump the track, and then they head for home and bring it on back. They scuffle.
shuffle until it feels just right. Ahead, behind, and in between. Now we're all doing that scuffle thing. Fraction, but the feel of the scuffle got.
Yeah, so that verse right there, you'll have to go back and get it yourself and listen to it. Is you may call it a rhythm infraction, but the feel of the scuffle's got a strange attraction.
Well, you're not wrong there. Yeah. That feels really good,
Thanks,
Andy.
Yeah. You know, one thing that's fun about that, you know, and it's got a limited audience. There's a lot of listeners that just don't get it. You know, if it's thrown in with something else by Bonnie or John Hyatt, everybody bouncing with it, but it's not like people really understand it. It just kind of happens. But if you're playing it, the thing that's wonderful about it is that you could do and you can go
right. You straighten it out for a second,
or you can go
you can go the other way. Right.
So
it's all good, kind of. Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun to play in that.
It is
thing. Yeah.
It is. When you get a whole band playing that groove, it feels like the whole stage is just lifting off the ground.
Michael Rhodes was the best at playing that.
Again, I wish I got to play with him. It would have been so cool.
So good. Because he would just drop in these footballs on 1, 2, 3, 4, but it was like, you know, it would swing still, even without grace notes on it.
Yeah.
The way that he would drop, you know, place those notes and everything, it was just it was really, really magical. And it's a lot of fun to do. So yeah, I've got a couple of songs on this album that have some of that going on it. That
man, it's great. It sounds great.
Yeah, thanks.
You got some great players on there, some great solos. Yeah. Obviously, you know, you've written some great songs, and your voice sounds great on there.
Thank you.
It's great. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't recommend it highly enough.
I hope some people get a chance to check it out. It's you know, I've got there are hard copies available through my website, or I think Bandcamp is going to have them also, and then they're going to be available for download in all the you know,
streaming sites and stuff. Okay,
and download and so forth.
So, do you have any live shows booked coming up?
Yeah. We've got like a semi-private CD release thing we're going to do as a house concert. Then we've got a 5-spot gig here in Nashville. We got a Pop Attorneys gig here, and I'm looking for some other stuff. Talking to some people about some other things. We may split a bill with that band that Dave Colella plays in Piper in the Hard Times. And, so yeah, we got some stuff coming up. So
well, let me know about that. And
it's called Andy Peake and the Peake Pockets.
The Peake Pockets. Yeah. Oh, clever! I like it. Yeah.
All got the same double entendre. Thing going on there. Yeah. And
wear your wallet in the front.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate it so much, Brian. I know we took a long time here, but it was
what a pleasure,
it was
Andy.
A blast. Yeah.
Thank you for coming over and sharing all this with us. Yeah.
And I love talking drums with you.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
You know, it's great to hear you. You know, it's fun to hear you. You know, you play all this different stuff good, and I haven't gotten to Rudy's. Honestly, I just haven't gotten there to hear it. But, you know, I know what you can do because I've heard you do it. And I heard you do that thing with Chris Bad News Barnes, which was a straight-ahead rock thing.
Yes.
And I'm going, God damn, Brian is anyway.
It's okay.
We talked about that.
That's okay.
Brian is so versatile and he can play all these different things and so forth. And, so it's really a pleasure knowing you.
Yeah. Oh, the pleasure is all mine.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate it. I'm sure I've worn you out by now. So
Not at all. No. Yeah.
get on about your day here.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Appreciate you.
We'll see you. We'll see you around.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.